Well, hi again, everybody. Welcome to another episode of 100 Yards of Football. On our show today, Take 5 with Steven Travers includes a man who is a father, he is a husband, he's an award-winning broadcaster, he's even an author, and I think that's one of the reasons why Steven likes him the most is because this man can write, and he's also the play-by-play man for the Oakland Athletics. Today, we're going to get to know up close and personal Ken Korak. And Ken, thank you for being on the show. But Steven, thank you for inviting him. A special friend of yours. You guys go way back decades into your past and your love for baseball.
Yeah, there's no question about it. And so I need to preface before we really get into talking to Ken a couple of things. First of all, the Oakland Athletics. I am as big a fan and as loyal a fan of the Oakland A's as anybody you'll ever come across. 1968, 9 years old. My father, for various reasons, did not really care that much about the Giants, and he just immediately fell in love with the Oakland A's. All through my teens, we probably went to 35 A's games a year. We went to every single Oakland A's postseason game, playoff World Series game throughout the 1970s, that era when they won and won and won. And as fate would have it, I went into professional baseball and eventually signed a contract with the Oakland Athletics and played in their organization. Keith Lippman was the manager of one of the teams that I played for, and and he was a longtime director of player development for the A's. And his assistant was Grady Fuson, whose character is described in the movie Moneyball as the guy gets into a pretty big argument with Billy Beane and doesn't fare very well in that argument. But that was a real person, and he was on that. He was on the staff of that team. I got brought up and pitched in a major league spring training exhibition game for the A's. And that's something I'm going to discuss with Ken because I've had some email conversations with him about when a young player comes up, and Ken will often say, well, this is a young player who played last year in A-ball or AA, and he's been in minor league camp. He just got called up and he's pitching in a spring training exhibition game, and what a thrill it must be. And boy, that hits home for me because I couldn't believe that it happened, and Billy Martin was in there. So, and then we fast forward to the San Francisco Examiner, and this is when I meet Ken Korak in 2001, and we immediately hit it off. And I remember telling Ken what a great fan my dad was, and one of my great memories is the radio. You know, I'm a guy who goes back, and this is how baseball is remembered by so many true fans. And for me, it's fishing in Lake Tahoe with my dad with a radio. And it's a station, I believe it's a Reno station, which is a little fuzzy, but we can get it. And we're getting whoever it was. It could be Monty Moore, then eventually it's Bill King, and eventually it's Ken Korak, along with Bill King. And he liked that story. And so over the years, I would obviously listen to a lot of games. And I had Ken's email address, and I would email Ken. And I got to make one little comment. When Ken was in Cleveland, he would return the email within an hour. And my guess is that's indicative of the fact that there probably wasn't much to do in Cleveland. Well, when he was in New York, maybe it might take a couple days. So probably a little bit more to do. But, you know, we would email each other back and forth and recite Vin Scully. Ken would write something like, the onlyest place in the world right now is the pitcher's mound at Dodger Stadium, you know. And then there was the time when he talked about the minor leaguer coming up, and I said, boy, that reminds me. So, but Ken, let me say one story that you told me, and then I want to ask you about it. And you could correct me if my memory about what you said was correct. And I'm a USC guy. I believe you said when you were a kid growing up, I thought at Pacific Palisades, I don't know if you said West LA. I think that is West LA. but I believe Palisades High is where I thought you went to high school. But at some point and you can correct me on this in a second, but I believe you told me that your dad would take you to Dado Field, and you'd have a tape recorder, and the Trojans, of course, were great power in those days, and you would announce the games into the tape recorder to practice. So let's start with that memory.
Yeah.
I've got any of that correct?
I don't recall recording any games at Dado Field. I do recall going there often because my dad went to school at SC. He started at Whittier College, and actually he got a baseball and basketball scholarship to go to Whittier for both sports. And this is before World War II. And then, of course, he was in the war and wound up serving on an air base outside of London. And outside the war, he came back and went to SC. And he just didn't feel that he was as talented as the SC athletes at that time to go out and play for any of the sports teams. But he majored in physical education and got his teaching credential and then his master's eventually. And as part of the curriculum, he served as a student trainer for the SC football teams, and actually wound up on the train and worked at a game at Notre Dame in the 40s. So he had a long history with SC, and because he became a high school and junior college baseball and basketball coach, he joined what was called at that time the Trojan Coaches Club. And they would meet every so often, USC graduates who went on to coach in the LA area. And so we did. We spent a lot of time watching SC games, not only the baseball games at Dado Field, but also the basketball games back in the sports arena, football, of course, at the Coliseum. And I do remember when I went to basketball and football games, I would call the games to myself.
Uh-huh.
So I didn't have a recorder then, but I would sit between my mom and dad, because my mom went to UCLA and my dad went to SC. So I sat right between them.
Oh boy.
And especially when, the two teams played. So my earliest memories of broadcasting would be talking to myself.
Okay.
So maybe my parents thought it was really weird that I'd go through like a whole football game and never say anything out loud.
That is an interesting perspective, Ken, that you, in many respects, enjoyed it enough. Now, was there an impetus that got you to go, I want to do this too? Because you listen to things on the radio and then you take that into your own consideration and just start articulating things. And even though you may not get it right at first, you're working on it, you're fine-tuning things, being able to look at something, describe it, and make it so that I can hear it as you're saying it and see the same thing through your work.
Yeah. It's a great question. I'm not sure there was one seminal event or seminal moment. It was just something I wanted to do, and it happened. Now, it goes back to Vin Scully. And I think a million broadcasters who grew up in LA and went on to have careers in the business would say they owe so much to Vinny. And I was 6 when the Dodgers moved to LA in '58. And obviously back then there were very few games broadcast on television. Right. In fact, for years, the only games the Dodgers televised were the 9 games against the Giants. And so if you wanted to follow the team, you had to do it on the radio. And so the opportunity to listen to Vin was something I've always cherished, and getting to know him a little bit. And obviously we had Chick Hearn doing the Lakers, and the story of my relationship with Bill King went back like 30 years before I actually met him, because I used to tune in the Warrior games late at night and listen to Bill. So it was really it's kind of a blessing and a curse to grow up in California, because you had these amazing influences, but yet it was also kind of intimidating as a young broadcaster, because I was thinking, there's no way I'll ever be as good as those guys. So that was kind of the intimidating aspect of growing up listening to them.
Yeah, and Dick Enberg was calling the Angel games back when he was just getting started. Bob Miller is an absolute hero, in my opinion, for the way that he could make hockey understandable to a young kid that's trying to understand the game.
Enberg had a profound influence too, because when he got his PhD from Cal State Northridge, which was San Fernando Valley State back then.
Wow. Yes.
And before he did the Angels, he started on Channel 5 in LA, and he would do the fights on Thursday nights and on Channel 5 from the
Yeah.
Olympic Auditorium at 18th
Yep.
and Grand.
Yeah.
Richmond 95171. and I didn't care much about boxing, but I love listening to Enberg, so that's why I would I'd watch the fights on Thursday nights. And eventually, of course, he did the UCLA replays. And Steve mentioned my high school days, and I grew up very close to UCLA and eventually to Pauley Pavilion after it was built.
Yeah.
I went to John Wooden's basketball camps, so we were all kind of tied into the whole UCLA deal out there. And it was a huge thing that the Channel 5 would replay the UCLA basketball games at 11 o'clock at night with Enberg doing the games by himself. But everybody who went to Pauley to watch the game would go back home and watch the replay on TV. And that's really the main reason that Enberg gained so much prominence in Los Angeles, and so well deserved, of course.
That is interesting because there's KTLA, KHJ Channel 9, KTTV, which when I'm growing up, they did the Dodger games. And again, like you mentioned, the Dodgers would have games against the Giants more often than you could see. Barely did they have any San Diego games that you would see on. The Reds would be games that everyone wanted to watch because how good the Reds were in the early 70s.
Yeah, actually the Reds played the first game at Dodger Stadium in April of '62. So yeah, and then Channel 9. My memory. This is fast forwarding many years, but I eventually became the voice of UNLV basketball on radio and TV.
Yes.
Chick Hearn did the Rebel games, and they broadcast them back into LA on Channel 9 because UNLV was so popular. And then they were able to get the casinos to sponsor the games. So they were making some pretty decent money doing the games, doing that.
Now, was that when Tarkanian was still running the Rebel show?
Yeah, oh yeah. Yeah, Chick did the games while Tark was there.
Okay.
And then I started the year Tark left.
So you didn't get to see him bite the towel every time there was a tense moment in the game?
I saw him bite the towel because I was doing San Jose State basketball.
Okay.
So he didn't bite the towel too often when they played the Spartans because they never lost to the Spartans. But my first year doing the Rebels was Rolly Massimino's first year, which was 1992.
Now, Rolly was arms and legs and everything and hair. He was, a little different than Tark. Well, let's go back into your first broadcasting. First, when did you know that was something that you wanted to do professionally? And was that a little bit of a journey in terms of your, Dad might want you to be a coach or to be a salesman with insurance. Was that an outside of your realm in terms of what you wanted to do? I know you wanted to do it, but was there something else that was a different path that you were supposed to take? Doctor, lawyer, what?
Yeah, there was a point there where I really thought about coaching.
Okay.
Because I played on a couple of tremendous high school teams, but I didn't get to play hardly at all. But I kind of helped out a little bit with some of the coaching and scouting when I was in high school. And yeah, coaching was something I thought about. You know, you think about law a little bit. But in my heart, it was broadcasting was what I wanted to do. But it took me a long time to come around to being dedicated enough and focused enough to really jump into it as a career. So it took me, I started at San Diego State. My mom passed away when I was 21, so that kind of derailed things a little bit. And
okay.
I was out of school for 10 months, and then I finished up at Santa Barbara, graduated from Santa Barbara. And then I worked a variety of jobs. I worked as a counselor at a group home. And then when I got to the Bay Area, I worked at a golf course up there, Bennett Valley in Santa Rosa. And during that time, I really felt like at some point you got to get serious about this and serious about a career. And as I said, I just didn't quite have my feeling was when I decided I was going to pursue broadcasting full time, I just had to be all in. And you have to be willing to go anywhere, and you have to be willing to work for minimum wage if that's the case.
Right.
So I actually didn't get my first broadcasting job until I was 28.
A little bit of a delay. Now, if you don't mind, a little personal. So your mother passes away, and you're
Yes.
down in San Diego. Does
Right.
your dad stay in West Hills? Because he's coaching at Valley College and some other places, correct?
Yeah, he was in West LA. He was in West LA. Yeah, my mom died in 1973. So he stayed in the house, but just briefly because my mom committed suicide. So it really wasn't a place where my dad felt, as you can understand,
Sure.
real comfortable.
Okay.
So it wasn't long before he moved out of the house, but he stayed in the area. And then he wound up in administration and was part of the group of educators who actually founded West LA Junior College out in Culver City. So that was his last job before he retired.
Okay. But his passion for basically teaching young men how to play the game and do it a little bit better, that most of his adult life, right?
Oh my God, yeah. And he was a great coach, and I'm really biased. He sent a couple of guys to the big leagues. So when I used to go to his games, and it was really it was a real education. And I'm not sure that any of this would have happened without my dad.
Okay.
Because we watched, obviously the TV was always on with games on, and we would talk about it. He took me to every sporting event there was in LA, even track and field. We loved going to the track meets and stuff like that. So really special guy, my old man, for sure.
Your mom's campus at UCLA Drake Field, that is a showcase for so many amazing, maybe not a whole lot of world records, but if you want to see the world record holders, they all train there if they're in LA at all, right? That's the place to go.
Yeah, Drake Stadium, which was named after Ducky Drake, the longtime trainer at UCLA, who was really legendary. And then remember the Coliseum relays? We used to go to that. I remember seeing Jim Ryan run a 3:53 mile.
Wow.
At the Coliseum relays, and we went to the Olympics in '84, of course.
Yes.
So yeah, great times.
So 28, you kind of put it all together and go, hey, go anywhere I need to go, and I'm going to start doing this. And tell us a little bit about how that took place.
Well, I was in Sonoma County working for my good friend Kelly Wolf at the golf course. And I thought there's no way somebody with zero experience was going to go get a job in a big market like LA or San Francisco. So I thought Sonoma County might be a good spot. And it was an area where there were a couple of stations that were still doing high school games, which is those stations are dinosaurs now, as you guys know.
Yeah.
And I sent a couple tapes. I had gone out to, went to the Coliseum, sat in the stands in the late 70s when very few people went to the games with a cassette recorder and recorded some baseball there. And I went down to the sports arena in LA and recorded a basketball game. It was actually USC versus Utah. And then I actually went to Candlestick and recorded a 49er game out there sitting in the stands. People thought I was a complete nutcase. They still do. I mean, they're listening to me and this guy's talking to himself, but that's how I made my first audition tape.
Wow.
And I sent it out to like 2 or 3 stations in Petaluma and Santa Rosa. Got a call back from the station in Petaluma, KTOB, 1490 radio, and they hired me.
So was it a Maxell or a TDK? What type of equipment were you using back those days? I know the cassette tapes, and they used to have metal.
It was all pretty primitive, believe me. It was pretty primitive.
Kidding.
Right? It really was, yeah.
Well, the determination that you have is not primitive. It's tough to do, especially when people around you might be, hey, kid, shut up, man. I'm trying to watch the ball game.
Yeah, for sure.
So your determination, obviously, that speaks for itself. You were trying to get your foot in that door somewhere, and that's the way to do it?
Yeah, and I was lucky that KTOB was it provided a great education because I didn't know what I was doing. And my first job was as a disc jockey on Saturday mornings from 6 until 10. I made $3.35 an hour.
Nice.
I worked 4 hours a week. And I did not literally know how to cue up a record. Now, this is back, of course, in the days of vinyl and cart machines and stuff. So, and they said, we have a very understanding and patient audience. And they just let me loose on Saturdays. And then eventually I was able to do some of their high school games because they covered the teams down in that area. And they did football, they did basketball, and they did baseball on the radio at KTOB. So that was really cool.
for some of our listeners, they may not realize Friday nights for high school football can be a very, very profitable evening for small stations. Were you golden with the Goldie or AM Gold? Is that your deal? Back in the day?
It was Top of the Bay Radio, KTOB 1490.
Right.
Top of the Bay.
And gosh, any Neil Sedaka or Perry Como, or were you spinning Grateful Dead records along with who else would be there? Jefferson Starship. Were you doing any?
Yeah, no, I was pretty deep into the Bay Area music scene for sure. And there was no real format, so I could play the records I wanted to play. But then eventually I got hired full time. So I did a talk show from 10 until 2. So once I got hired there full time, besides doing the sports, it was kind of a community affairs show where you would have a wide range of guests on the air. Very, very locally oriented, which was a neat thing.
Well, the reason I kind of went there a little bit is because there's aspects of the business that I'm imagining that you didn't really know and understand once you get that full time. Now I get a little bit better. What's the rhythm of this and how that eventually comes into play with how you do your broadcasts and understanding the length of the commercials, when you need to be ready, and all these other things that are a part of really your own manager. You take care of yourself, but you're producing the show as you're on it, correct?
Everything is an experience, and you gain this reservoir of knowledge, even if it was stuff. And I didn't particularly care for being a DJ, and I enjoyed the talk show to a point, but it wasn't the most natural thing for me. But you're right, it's a great point. We also did, as soon as I was done with the talk show, we had what was called a production shift, where I would go back into one of the studios and record commercials for a couple of hours. So, as I said, it was a well-rounded education.
Yeah. And doing basketball, right? And working.
Doing basketball, yeah, for sure.
And how did you not get from one to the other, but I guess you just don't step back when they're asking for volunteers and you yeah, sure, I'll do that. Go ahead, and that obviously builds your resume as well, being able to call different things. What was the pace like for you? I think basketball personally, much harder to call. It's very quick and the ball moves so quickly. It'd be like hockey in comparing to baseball. You're telling stories and you're giving the experience, where basketball, you don't have that same type of time constraint.
The pace is different, but to me, the broadcasts weren't that different. And I never separated the three. I never knew if I'd advanced beyond Petaluma, honestly, but I just wanted to get as good as I could at all three. So I never valued one over the other or emphasized one over the other. And I was lucky enough to do 22 years of college basketball and 12 years of college football. And so I was just fortunate that the break came in baseball, but I suppose it could have come in one of the other sports, or maybe not even come at all. But there is a transition. I think that being down here in spring training, I think going from the intensity of, let's say, a conference tournament or an NC2A tournament game, and then to the very laid-back tempo of spring training, I had to remind myself, just kind of calm down a little bit, take it a lot slower, because certainly back then the difference in the pace was accentuated.
Any specific names of people that helped you plant those roots to where you could eventually do the, you will talk about the San Jose experience, but things started taking place very quickly for you, one step to another, really building. Your talent started to really show, and people recognizing that.
Well, I wound up broadcasting for Sonoma State and did their games, football and basketball, for 3 years. Their athletic director, Ralph Barkey, is a wonderful man. And as fate would have it, or ironically, I guess, he was the basketball coach at Santa Barbara when I was going to school there. And I always kind of fantasized about going out for the team and playing for him, but that I wasn't good enough. But he was really incredibly supportive of me, and actually came on and did some color on the basketball games, and he was great. And when I moved from doing the Sonoma games to the San Jose State games, he called KCBS Radio in San Francisco and just gave a recommendation that I'll be forever thankful for the endorsement he gave me.
It's always good to be on the right side of a good relationship, isn't it? Right?
Yeah, what a great man. And then, Ted Robinson has had a phenomenal career, as you know, both in the Bay Area and nationally. Really encouraged me to apply for the job at San Jose State because back then, San Jose State's games were carried on KCBS, but then Stanford also acquired the rights to Stanford football. And so for a couple of years there, they carried both the Spartans and Stanford. And Ted was doing San Jose State, got elevated to doing the play-by-play for Stanford. And he really encouraged me to apply for the job doing the Spartans football games on KCBS.
Okay. And you get that. And what was that like for you? I mean, everything seems to be getting bigger and better every time you accept a new position.
It was great fun doing it. Their first year in 85, they weren't that good. But then, of course, in 86, they had a great team. And they had that famous game against Fresno State when they came back late and scored 2 touchdowns at the end and won the conference. I don't think my work was that good back then. I thought I was ready for the kind of major market experience, but I was pretty neurotic back then. So it took a couple years to get out of my own way. And Steve can relate to this because they talk about pitchers when they get called up from the minor leagues, and the first thing the pitching coach usually tells them is, okay, you're in a big league game, but you deserve to be here and trust your stuff. Well, I didn't trust my stuff. I thought, now I'm in a major market, I have to sound like these guys. And so it took a decent amount of time for me to find my voice, and luckily it happened. And the people I worked for were patient with me, but there were some neurotic moments I'm not afraid to admit back then.
What were some of the weaknesses that you would note that I know I can correct this, I'm just not doing it while I'm on the air in a way that I'm satisfied? Is that a fair way to describe it?
Yeah, just because my mind was cluttered trying to be somebody that I wasn't. So okay. the whole process for me was to kind of find the Zen in it. I'm not saying I'm this like spiritual Zen master or something, but to me, it boiled now that I've really worked really hard on just being in the moment and trusting that you're in the moment and let it flow. So back then, if your mind is kind of cluttered because you're unsure of what you want to do while you're on the air, you're going to lose out for sure.
Well, between San Jose State and you had the Vegas job, working with the Rebels, and eventually we're going to get to the A's. But what was it? One giant leap? Was it bypass? Because to me, that's you're doing your reps. You're getting your work in. You're showing at the lower level that you're comfortable in your own skin, yes, but you're also good enough to where other people are going, hey, guess what? You're good enough. You should be doing other stuff.
Well, concurrent to the time I was doing Sonoma State, I started doing minor league baseball in Sonoma County. The Angels had moved their single-A club out there, and I did 25 home games in 1981. 2 games on the road because 81, you guys will recall, there was a work stoppage in the summertime. And our club was an Angels affiliate, and the Padres had their club in San Diego. And so we actually went down on July 4th weekend and broadcast a couple of games from the big league ballparks. So on July 4th, the Redwood team played the Reno team at the Big A. And then the next day, I think that was July 3rd. Then the next day, literally on July 4th, we went down to San Diego and broadcast games down there. They had about 38,000 fans at a California League game, which was pretty amazing. They had a fireworks show after the game. Tickets were $1. They gave away free watermelon. So that was my first experience working in a major league ballpark. That was in 81. But then I didn't do any baseball in professional baseball in 82 and 83. And then the Redwood team, which played up in Rohnert Park at Rohnert Park Stadium, got sold to a man named Michael Watkins, who is still a good friend, and they got all their games on the radio. The first and only time that had happened for them. So I did the entire season in 84. And parenthetically, they had an incredibly great team that year, led by guys like Mark McLevore and Devon White and Jack Howell, Bob Kipper. And so that was 84. I didn't do any professional baseball in 85. But then in 86, I got hired by by the Phoenix Firebirds, the Giants AAA affiliate. So that was my first taste of doing games in the Coast League.
How about that? Hey, Steven, $1 for a ticket and a free slice of watermelon. You'd have even showed up at a couple of those games, would you?
You don't know how close to home you're hitting here. At one point I was released, and I drove up to Rohnert Park and had a tryout with, I believe his name was Chris Cannizzaro. He was the manager of the team.
Chris, yeah, great memory, Steve. He was the manager of that first team I worked for in '81.
Yeah, and
kind of a grizzled former major league catcher.
Yeah, I think he had a cousin who was in the Naval Reserves with my father. But anyway, yeah, and so and he said, well, it was towards the end of the season, and he said, no, we really don't have a spot. And I had just been accepted to transfer to the University of Southern California, and my arm was shot, and I'd given all I can give. But that's just one of 10 bullet points from what you've been saying over the past 10 minutes that reminds me of so much of me. And in many ways, I feel like our careers have paralleled each other. You as a broadcaster, me as a writer. I start with the fact that, you said you worked various different jobs. Well, in between going to school and playing baseball, I mean, I did all kinds of things. I worked in an ice factory and literally dug ditches. And my dad was just like your dad. My dad was a coach, and my dad was an enormous fan of all sports and took me to all the same things that your dad took you to, from track meets to baseball games to football games. And, you talked about the plethora of talent in the state of California. You grew up in Los Angeles. I grew up in San Francisco. And my God, from the very beginning, incredible announcers, Bill King, Lon Simmons, Russ Hodges, Vin Scully, Dick Enberg, Tom Kelly, one of my all-time favorites, who I became friends with. And so you become the announcer of the Oakland A's. And A's announcers had been Monty Moore, who I liked a lot, and John Miller had been an A's announcer, and Bill King and Lon Simmons, who are two of the all-time greatest announcers in world history, period. Hall of Famers. Bill King had announced those glorious 3 innings that I threw at Phoenix Municipal Stadium in March of 1982. And the Giants have always had really good announcers, and they still do. I mean, Dwayne Kuiper and Mike Krukow and John Miller. Enter Ken Korak. So I just have to say, from my standpoint, I'm listening to the A's, and I'm used to great announcers. Now I'm listening to Ken Korak. And so there's a natural skepticism. Oh, okay, he's in with the big boys. Who is this guy? Because if you're going to compete in the Bay Area, it's like having a great restaurant in San Francisco. It has to be first class, because the audience, the people who go there, really know good food. And the people who listen to sports in the Bay Area really know great announcers. And within a very short period of time, I was like, this guy, Ken Korak, is absolutely a great announcer. And I'm here to say, someday, I don't know when it's going to happen, but someday you're going to be in the Hall of Fame, because you are a Hall of Fame. You are worthy of a spot in the broadcaster's wing of the Hall of Fame. But
that's very nice of you, Steve. First of all, I don't want to interrupt, but I appreciate it.
I know that you're not a man of ego, but you are a man of talent. And I've listened to you all these years, and it's been an absolute pleasure to be your friend and to listen to your talents over the air. And, you come to the A's, and actually when you got there, it was the 90s, and the A's have had this incredible history. I mean, going back to Connie Mack, but this history has always been sort of going way up or down. And it was kind of a down period in the late 1990s. And then along comes Billy Beane, and then you're there during this amazing run. Talk about being with a club as they are in the ascent. Art Howe becomes their manager. I never forget Art Howe was on with Jim Rome. He was talking about how the team was rallying late in the 1999 season. It's like, the A's are back. And that was a period you were there. So talk about this early period of time, what it was like to be with Bill King and this ball.
Well, I owe so much to Bill, as you know, and I tried to describe some of that in 257 pages, and I'm not sure I fully did him justice, but I got hired in 96, as you know, Steve, and I replaced Lon, which could have been a very daunting thing and intimidating because Lon was one of my idols, and like you said, the hiring of Bill King and Lon Simmons by the A's in 1981 was a stroke of genius because the A's really were struggling at the end of the Finley era, and they needed something that gave the franchise credibility. And so when they put Lon and Bill together, first of all, people were shocked that these two giants in the business would be paired on the same broadcast. So, but it really worked. It worked so well, and they did. They brought credibility and legitimacy to the club. So, and I owe so much to Bill for embracing me. He could have big leagued me. He could have acted like I'm the iconic figure. You're just the guy coming out of AAA, and I had spent 4 years working, one game a week and a part-time job for the White Sox. So, but once we got past that 96, 97 time, and McGuire was traded to the Cardinals at the deadline in 97, and you started to see the foundation being laid in 98, and then obviously 99, they were really good. They got eliminated the next to last Sunday of the regular season when they played the Rangers in Arlington. And then 2000 began the great run, and that was the beginning of 11 separate trips to the postseason for the A's. And I just feel so fortunate, even though every postseason wound up eventually in disappointment and frustration, but the chance to be able to broadcast postseason games at Yankee Stadium, at Fenway Park, at a packed Coliseum when 46 or 47,000 fans were there, and some of the most iconic moments in the history of the game, like the Jeter flips. So those are pretty amazing times.
I would think, how much of the history of the A's, Steven started the beginning of the show when he first became a fan, and you got those, I'm going to call them the goofy uniforms. The white with the gold didn't make any sense to me, but it made sense to the team, and they were able to do the combos. But the Reggie, the Rudies, the Vita Blues, all those amazing players, and I'm not doing any of them justice because there were so many of them. The 3 years where they beat the Reds and the Dodgers and are world champions, and the controversy there because Charlie O didn't keep any of them except for Vita.
Right.
Let everybody else go. So knowing that history from the 70s, then the 80s history when Bill first started, and then you get there in the mid-90s, how much of that it comes into play during a broadcast where you're talking about stuff and, gosh, I wish I could talk about some of this a little bit more. You've got the time to do it, but getting that background info and having it down pat, what's that like for you in terms of bringing that out?
Great question. I really worked hard to try to learn as much as I could.
Sure.
Now, I was up in the Bay Area beginning in 79, so I didn't miss out a whole lot, although when I was away during AAA games, I would come back late in the summer, and we had that month of September where you could go to games after the minor league season had ended. Of course, I worked with Ray Fosse, so he was a phenomenal source of information going back to the 70s, and that really helped. Okay. And the other thing was that those great A's players were accessible. So guys like Vita Blue were around.
Yes.
And the A's had those reunions, and so you could spend time with Joe Rudy and a lot of those greats you talked about, Reggie. Although it took a little bit longer for Reggie to come back around.
Hall of Famers.
Hall of Famers, some of the greatest players in the history of the game. And
absolutely.
I just think if you're going to do this for a living, you better learn the history of your franchise. Yeah. So I never felt handicapped. I didn't know nearly the intimate details that Fosse knew. And obviously Bill began there in 81, but felt pretty strongly that I had a decent feel for because the history was just so rich.
Yeah. And your ability, like you just said a moment ago, to visit with these guys at some of the reunions, to sit down and when you get to say, here's my analogy, and please forgive me for taking a moment to do this. There were times where I'm listening to Vin Scully as a Dodger fan growing up, and you probably had the same thing. And then Johnny Padres says to Pee Wee Reese, and they're talking about Johnny Roseboro, and they're talking, and then Sandy Koufax comes into the room, and it's 3-2 to Garvey. I could care less about what Garvey's doing at the plate. Vin, please finish that story.
Yeah.
You do that, right?
Right. And I was very good friends with Dick Williams and actually did some AAA games with him. And Dick moved to Vegas, and there were a bunch of us that had lunch in the off season one day a week. And so he was another great resource for me. But yeah, I mean, Vinny set the standard.
Yeah.
He really did. In fact, just to go ahead many, many years and decades, it might have been the last time that we saw Vinny at Dodger Stadium. And he pulled my broadcast partner, Vince Cotroneo, and me aside in the press box. And he said, "What can you tell me about Curt Young in the 1988 World Series?" Now, Curt Young was the A's pitching coach and had actually pitched for the A's in the 88 World Series against the Dodgers at Dodger Stadium. And Vinny, this speaks to Vinny and how he never mailed it in, even when he had every right to. At that point, he was in his 80s. And he said, "I would feel terrible if Curt Young went to the mound to mentor one of the A's young pitchers, and I couldn't talk about what he did on the same mound pitching for the A's in the World Series."
Oh, wow.
So that's Vinny, right? Yeah. And so those of us who were lucky enough to learn from him, those are lessons that I guess you never stop learning.
Absolutely. My goodness. Yeah. That just like you said, never mailing it in. I have a friend who did some broadcasting here in the Atlanta area, and he would say stuff like, when I talked to Chipper in the locker room, well, he talked to Chipper 3 weeks ago, not yesterday. So there's ways that you can kind of get around it to quote unquote fool the fans, but still nonetheless doing your homework means going down every now and then and maybe even having an uncomfortable conversation with a guy about his hitting slump or, he had 2 errors the other day. But for you to be able to turn that into, you're taking lemons and turning them into lemonade.
And then, of course, spring training is big with that because the clubhouse, like today, the clubhouse was open from 8 to 9 in Mesa.
Okay.
And that's a great time, especially with the young players, because I don't want the season to start if one of these young players makes the team and they're wondering, who is this guy? So you start to develop some of those contacts with the young players or new additions to the team, and that goes back to the beginning of spring training.
And you've been doing that for quite a while. And then obviously you mentioned Bill King, working with the legend. What was that like? I mean, you're not pinching yourself. You got to go to work and you got stuff to do, but having...
No, I was pinching myself, believe me. No, I don't. Obviously, I don't know. It's indescribable what that was like because I listened to him literally for 30 years before I worked with him. And then every time there'd be a huge moment in an A's game, and Bill would add his famous exclamation, "Holy Toledo."
Yep.
I'd have these deja vu moments like, well, I heard him say that in a Warrior game in 1968. So he was great to me too. And the most fascinating, well-rounded individual, the most articulate, well-read, most brilliant person, most passionate person. So I've said this before, if you go to the dictionary and you pull out every adjective in the dictionary, you could find one of those that applied to Bill.
How about that? Wow. Good question. Hey, did you guys have the same booth for Raider games? Did
yes.
Bill have to move? Okay, so you're in the same location.
The booth at the Coliseum was right behind home plate, literally. Yes. Last year, when I did the last game at the Coliseum, you're sitting right behind home plate, which is also the 50-yard line back in those days for football.
Yes, yeah. Those stadiums, St. Louis, here in Atlanta, Philadelphia, even Seattle, I would say, was one. San Diego, of course. Candlestick, not so much, but it doesn't have the same design. Those round Pittsburgh, All of those stadiums seem like they were built by the same guy. Or
They so-called cookie cutter stadiums.
Yes, multi-purpose facilities.
Right.
And the good news out of that is that you can have two professional games on the same day. All you got to do is move some stands around and paint the chalk a little bit differently, or paint over it.
You couldn't do that at the Coliseum. You could do it on the AstroTurf fields, but not at the Coliseum.
Understood. I'm just saying that you could. And then technically speaking, later on, it turned out, well, my view line is a lot different for this one game versus the other. Your view line there in Oakland being at the 50, but you're pretty far away from the action, of course. And then when they added on to the other side, what would be left and right field, they added those other bleachers up there to make it a little bit bigger.
They added Mount Davis. That's when they, quote, were renovating the Coliseum for football.
Yes.
I would never characterize it as a renovation. But yeah, we had a great view. At the Coliseum, the view was perfect.
Okay.
We were a little high, but it was still a great view. It was a great place to call a game.
Yep. And obviously multi-purpose, you got to share it with the Raiders. Go ahead, Steven, please forgive me.
Well, you keep hitting on things that I associate with. I played in the minors. I guess you could say I played with them. I was about 10 days in Modesto with Kurt Young in '82. Good left-handed pitcher, so I probably could have helped with Vinny with a little research. I also could have helped Vinny with talking about the early days of Jose Canseco, who was a teammate of Idaho Falls in '82. But what you were talking about, the team and the championships and their history. I'm here to tell you, as an A's fan and a historian, because I also wrote a book, A's Essential: The History of the Team. There is not a team in the history of baseball, and I'm going back all the way to Philadelphia, but in Oakland, absolutely, that has given their fans more thrills than the Oakland Athletics. Now they are a team that, in the Moneyball era has been built for regular season success, less so than postseason success. But if you're a fan of a team and you want a team that's in the hunt right down to the end and playing in the playoffs and has great announcers announcing it, there's no other team in baseball, or very few other teams in baseball, that have given their fans as much. And the thing about the A's, that it's not just that they have put up winning seasons, but they've done it with young players, young enthusiastic players. Billy Beane tends to like college players, and these are just the kinds of guys who are accountable and are very enthusiastic, and fans take to them. And you've known these guys, but I want to also thank you. Book you wrote about Bill King, because I wrote a nice chapter about Bill. I had an opportunity to get to know him and interview him, and I think my chapter was called "The King of Them All," and that's what he was. So your book, tell us a little bit about your decision to write a book about Bill after he passed away so unfortunately, so way too soon. And what a labor of love that was.
Yeah, Bill died, as you know, in October of 2005. We did our last game together at what was then Safeco Field in Seattle in 2005. I always wanted to write a book. I was a journalism major for my first 2 years in college. Never really thought I could do it because and Steve, you've done several, but to actually sit down and do it and have the discipline to do it, I didn't know if I had the writing skills to do it, but I did think that, and if you're going to write a book, I felt like it's got to be a subject that I'm passionate about, and that I could also get people to talk about. And so Steve Kettman, a longtime Bay Area sports writer, who has had a great career as a book writer, had several bestsellers, has a retreat, works with young authors of all kinds, not just young, in the Santa Cruz Mountains. And he started a very small publishing company called Wellstone Books. And Steve had grown up listening to Bill like I had, gotten to know Bill because he was on the A's. Beanie was a regular on the beat when he was working for the Chronicle. And we kind of hashed this idea that let's try to write a book about Bill King. And Steve said, if you can do this, I'll edit it and I'll get it published. And so it's hard to get a book published. It's hard enough to write a book, but to get one published is doubly hard. But so Steve served as the editor, the primary editor of the book, had another great editor named Pete Danko, who did a great job. And then Steve got the book published. And it took about 10 months to do it. I was totally obsessive once I got into the process because I just couldn't wait to write. And the catalyst for that, the impetus for that was the interviews. That book doesn't get written without the passion of the people that were so willing to talk about Bill. And as it kind of evolved, because I didn't really have a structure when I started, in a sense, it's a little bit of a Bay Area sports history. And because of the people that I was lucky enough to interview. So those guys gave me the momentum and the real desire to sit down and write.
Ken, do me a favor. Tell me about that interview process, because I would imagine, having worked with Bill as long as you did and got to know him, was it fascinating to you to hear other parts of his life story or the way that he affected others? Some respects similar to you. Yeah, I had a similar story, but also uniquely different. I didn't know that thing about him, and that's amazing. Yeah. What type of discovery was that for you in order to get the background that you needed to put this on paper?
Yeah, huge discovery. And we decided that we would focus on the A's, the Raiders, and the Warriors, and also Bill's time in LA with the Raiders, and also on his other interests like his sailing and his painting and his eating and his great fondness for Russian history and the fact that he learned how to speak Russian and all that. So wow. We had a lot of avenues to go down. And so then I would try to pick out, okay, let's say it's the Warriors. Who am I going to talk to from the Warriors? And if it was the Raiders, then the same kind of process took place. Yeah. And I was lucky enough to get a hold of most of the people that I wanted to interview. And like I said, they couldn't wait to talk about Bill. When I called Tom Flores, and I caught him right as he was about to leave on vacation. And he said, Ken, I can talk about Bill right now, but I've only got about 15 minutes. And that's not enough time for me to talk about Bill to you. So can you call me back when I get back, and I can give you enough time, because 15 minutes just isn't enough time. Yeah. And that's the way it was. John Madden, Rick Barry, Al Attles. You could go down the list. I mean, it was really fun for me because these were people that I grew up watching or had interacted with. And then you have a chance to interview them and talk about Bill. And it was really a special time.
Were there other reporters that were around that also knew him in a different manner than what the coaches or some of the players would have relationships with him?
Oh, yeah. We talked to some of the longtime sports writers in the Bay Area and broadcasters also provided quite a bit of the context and texture to the book as well. John Miller wrote the foreword for the book. Yeah. But yeah, some of the old Glenn Dickey, I'm going to forget some people, but Art Spander, Monty Poole had a big part to play in the book. The great late Scotty Sterling, who worked for many sports teams and also was an analyst for Bill on the Raider broadcast. Rich Walkoff. There are a lot of people that we talked to.
I can imagine that, Bill's legacy for being a part of let's just for the Raiders as an example, some of the great, not just the calls, but the historical moments, right? You can almost hear NFL films playing with violins and drums in the background while Bill is making the Holy Toledo call, and they're beating Philadelphia badly in the Super Bowl there, or beating the Redskins, and for him to be a part of that and be included in what Al Davis, once a Raider, always a Raider, that carryover into that, and for him to be kind of a glue source to put it all together, especially from a radio perspective, and then you being a part of that in terms of highlighting these things and bringing them out in your book, that had to be a great thrill for you to know different aspects of Bill's life and being able to compilate that.
Well, they said that after Bill passed away, they had his memorial service at the Coliseum Arena. which is also where they recently had the memorial for Ricky Henderson, of course.
Mm.
And I think it was Davis who said that Bill was the only one who could bring the Warriors, the A's, and the Raiders together for tribute to Bill. And the A's asked me to eulogize Bill. Each team chose one or two people to offer their remarks. The Raiders chose Davis. And in true Davis fashion, when he finished his tribute to Bill, he was up at the podium there. He said, "I bestow upon Bill the cloak of immortality." So Dave is the only person in the world who could get away with that, right? You know. So then I had to follow Al Davis. So how do you do that? You know, what's there left for me to say when he's been given the cloak of immortality by Al Davis?
Goal is determined.
Right, exactly.
Well, my thing with Al would be to say, how many times did he use the word magnificent? Because he did that every time that they won a championship. He goes, he just looks at the players. And again, as a coach, as a general manager, as a part owner, as a guy that ran the league in so many different, he had so many different hats that he wore to get the game of football off the ground the way that it needed to in the 60s, and to bring these two leagues together. For him to look out at those players and say, "You were magnificent today," that's one of those compliments that you go, I don't think anybody could say it any better than that right there. That's the articulation. Nothing would beat that.
No, nothing would. And Bill and Davis were very close.
Yeah.
In fact, and I've drawn upon this a little bit, looking ahead to the A's move to Sacramento, that when the Raiders moved to LA, Bill flew down from the Oakland airport the day before the game, flew down on a Saturday, and he and Davis would have dinner Saturday night, and then Bill would do the game on Sunday, and he'd fly back home. So they had a relationship that lasted a long time.
Talk about the impact on the city of Oakland. Obviously, when the Raiders left, that's got to be a gigantic hole ripped out of the heart of the sports world in that area. And now with the A's being a part of it, but just Raiders first, what did that mean in terms of your understanding of Oakland sports, not the athletics, but athletics in general in that area?
And what I learned from doing some of the research on the book was that those were different times too, especially when the Raiders were born in the old days of the AFL, that the players had to work in the off season. And a lot of those players stayed in the Bay Area, and especially the East Bay, and they had jobs.
Yeah.
And so their lives were intertwined with the lives of people who would come out and watch their games on Sundays. So they were very involved in the community. And that's one thing that really stood out. And of course, it was very difficult for Raider fans. It was emotional, analogous to what has happened with the A's, of course, with the move to Sacramento and then eventually to Vegas. And it's an emotional thing, and it's difficult. There's no other way to put it, that when you give your heart and soul to a franchise, and as a broadcaster, you want that emotional tie to your audience. Dick Enberg used to say, he wrote this in his book, he said, give the audience a reason to care. So that's a big part of our job. And if you don't feel that you can engage your audience from that standpoint emotionally, then I guess you're really not doing your job.
A very interesting way to put that. I would think that obviously the politics of football at that time and demanding a new stadium or some upgrades and everything that these other teams had that Al wanted in specific for that the home stadium. But is there a split because the A's had a part of that as well? And did they not want the same changes, or how did it all come to place in your understanding of the great divide that took place between the city of Oakland, the National Football League, Al Davis, and then the desires of what the fans want?
There are probably other people that can speak more specifically about that than me, because obviously I wasn't privy to the negotiations that went on. But I do believe the A's, of course, eventually had to sign off on the renovations to the Coliseum. But unfortunately, it just didn't work out in terms of baseball. Yeah. And I'm not sure it worked out in terms of football, too. So I used to love going to the Coliseum as a fan. The bleachers were real baseball bleachers. They weren't after the Raiders came back. You had the great view of the Oakland Hills at night when the lights would come on. So I certainly much preferred the Coliseum as a baseball park before the Raiders came back. They were literally building Mount Davis while the games were being played in '96. I mean, right in the middle of games, you'd hear jackhammers going off and stuff. And the A's had to open the regular season in '96 in Las Vegas because the stadium wasn't ready. And I had done AAA games there for several years. I was literally sitting in the same seat I sat in doing AAA games when I broadcast my first game for the A's, a regular season Major League games, a regular season Major League game at Cashman Field in Las Vegas.
How about that? Wow. Well, when you get there in '95 season, '96, they started getting better again. You missed the Bash Brothers, you missed the World Series, the Earthquake Series, but there are some triumphant moments that take place, but fewer and far between. Obviously, the Billy Beane beginning of that and the Moneyball era. What was that like for you in terms of just piecing together how the club is going to do, expectations in a world where free agency and Dodger, Yankee, Red Sox money isn't going to be matched in the same way there in Oakland?
I never felt that the A's had this great underdog status. And, maybe I was just Pollyannish about it, but they had a real chance to win the World Series 2 or 3 of those years.
Yep.
And if you look back 2000, they lose in the 5th game to the Yankees. The Yankees were at the height of their powers back then. 2001, and Billy Beane would confirm this, that was the best A's team of all those teams beginning in 2000 that played in the postseason 11 times. They go to New York right after 9/11, which added this incredible poignancy to the events at Yankee Stadium a month after 9/11. Hudson and Mulder are pitching there, and they win the first 2 games. They come back and play game 3, and who knows what would have happened. The play has been replayed a million times, and obviously it's so sad to understand what's happened to the Giambi family and with Jeremy. But, if not for the Jeter flip, that could have been a World Series team for the A's in 01.
Yep.
And they lose in the 5th game to the Twins in 03. They have a 2-0 lead in the series to the Red Sox. In 03, and they eventually play the 5th game at the Coliseum, and it's Barry Zito against Pedro Martinez. So they had a great chance to advance, and in circumstances kind of led them down a different path. But I always thought those clubs were capable of winning a World Series.
Let me jump in here, Harper. I just wanted to make a couple notes on what Ken has been talking about. We're talking about Bill King, and just to let you know, most of the years that the Raiders were in Los Angeles, I lived down there. So that was incredible for me to be down there listening to Bill King doing the Los Angeles Raiders. That really was terrific. And then also, Ken, you talked about the city of Oakland, unique city, and we'll never see this again. We will never see this again. This was the last of similar to the Brooklyn Dodgers when they left. And we had talked about this, Harper, a few weeks back, the relationship of the Raider players to the city of Oakland. And they lived in the neighborhoods. And the A's lived in the neighborhood. They generally live in the Walnut Creek area, which is close. And you can see them in restaurants and in stores. And the Raiders would be led by Ken Stabler. They would go to local bars at the Airport Hyatt or at down in San Leandro or Hayward, these kind of blue collar places. And so there was a uniqueness to Oakland that we are not going to see again.
Mm-hmm.
But I wanted to also introduce Ken. Now getting back to the fact that Oakland is it's not what you'd consider a large market team. They're part of a large market in that the Bay Area is a big market or close to a big market. It's not quite New York. It's not quite Chicago or Los Angeles, but there are about 9 or 10 million people who live in the Bay Area, and not to mention the affiliates. Which brings us to the movie Moneyball. And I talked earlier about how I think Ken is a Hall of Famer. And so there might have been, it's tough to get into the Hall of Fame if you're a small market team. But Ken is immortalized by his role in the movie Moneyball. Now, as is Greg Papa. Unfortunately, Bill, that's right, Bill King, of course, also had a big role, although he was not alive by the time that movie came out. And I, just as an aside, I was at the premiere. I don't think Ken was there because they were playing a home game that night.
I was at the premiere.
Oh, you were that?
Yeah, downtown Oakland. My wife and daughter and I were there.
Then I saw. Okay, I guess I said hi to you. I apologize. I remember sitting. I didn't even realize until the lights came on that I was sitting 3 seats away from Billy Beane, and it was funny because he said, "Well, that was really a surreal thing to see Brad Pitt play me." But Billy is the world's greatest USC Trojans football fans, and the next thing out of his mouth was, "How do you think SC's going to do on Saturday against Arizona State?"
Yeah, for sure.
To talk about, but talk to me about your experience, your with the movie Moneyball, the fact that they used you, and that you had this great line. It was the 1947 New York Giants, and then you mentioned 2 or 3 teams that had held this consecutive game record, and the A's had just broke it. Oh, and I mentioned this about you in a conversation we had. We had my friend Mike McDowd, who's an announcer, and we were talking about great announcers. And what I said about you, Ken, and is perfectly encapsulated by what you said in Moneyball. You are a very professional announcer. You give a very straightforward description of the game. But when it's appropriate, when the moment is big enough, you become a fan, and you really let your emotions and your excitement and your enthusiasm really get a little bit over the top in a beautiful way. And I love that.
I'm not so sure that they were. I have a love-hate relationship with those calls over the years. They were over the top, that's for sure.
I know that you love Ken.
I guess if I was ever going to lose my mind, I guess at the end of a 20-game winning streak would be the right time to do it, right, Steve?
Well, absolutely. So talk a little bit about how movie Moneyball, you came into it. And
there are a lot of layers to the story, because Bill, of course, was the #1 announcer for the A's. He was the lead broadcaster, which meant that he always did the 9th inning, unless he was on vacation. Well, it just so happened that Bill had chosen Labor Day weekend as a time to take vacation. The A's came back from a road trip, and they were on the verge of setting what was then the American League record. And Bill had friends, and for good reason, saying, "Bill, you need to come back and do the games because your voice is going to be part of history." And remember, they won the 16th game on a Friday night, 17, then 18. Number 19 was literally on Labor Day, and number 20 would be after a day off on Wednesday. And so Bill would have had every reason to come back as the voice of the team back then to call those games and be part of history. And he said, "No, Ken has been scheduled to do those games as the lead announcer, and I'm going to stay away and honor the fact that I made this commitment to take vacation. It wouldn't be right for me to come back and do the games," which was a great, that speaks to his magnanimity, that's the way he felt about that. So that's the only reason that that you hear my calls on Moneyball, was that I was on the air in the 9th inning. So that's kind of the backstory to it. As far as the calls are concerned, I owe a lot to the. I'm kind of losing my voice a little bit. The allergies have been a little bad out here in the desert. But they went through hundreds of hours of radio and TV calls to try to provide the authenticity that they were looking for that movie. Bennett Miller was the director of the movie, and a renowned director, was nominated for 2 or 3 Academy Awards. And so they didn't have to do that. They could have hired someone just to voice over those highlights, which has been done a million times in movies before. So I'm grateful to them for the effort that they made to provide that kind of authenticity. I actually acted a scene for the movie with Bennett Miller that was, it was designed to set the scene for opening day for the 2002 season. The A's had lost Jason Giambi and so many of their other stars. Expectations were low. And so I acted a scene with Miller, who was literally sitting next to me. But the scene, I was so bad, I assume, that the scene has never been seen by anybody except for maybe a select group of people who decided, for good reason, that scene should wind up on the cutting room floor. So my acting debut is on the cutting room floor.
Man.
But that's the reason I still get residual checks from the movie, because I was technically part of the cast.
Yeah, that's awesome. I didn't realize that even if your scene was cut. Well, do you have? I think it's the credit. Steven would know better than I. The crediting is you're listed as a credited person in the movie, so yeah, you would get.
If you get binoculars, when the credits roll at the very end, after the hairdresser and the grip and all the other people,
yeah,
you can see my name in there, but you've really got to squint.
Okay.
You might need a magnifying glass to see my name in the credits
at
the bottom of them when it rolls at the end of the movie.
I will get my LASIK vision taken care of before that, but nonetheless. So do me a favor. You lived it. You were a part of it in real life. Did they capture enough of the movie? I love the fact in the movie that they've got that strange music, those single notes that are being played, and they're showing analytical information and all that. And it created the tension that I needed to go, how complicated this is. But it's not complicated. It's just baseball. Let's just get a hit. I'm going to help you do that. And the different characters that were a part of that, and taking live action from game footage, actual sound that you put out there, and then mixing that with the actors. I thought that was very well done. Did you get the same sensation?
Yeah.
This is a mess. I don't want anything to do with it.
No, they did a really good job. There are 2 things. Number one, the characterization of Art Howe was really unfair. And Philip Seymour Hoffman, may he rest in peace, was a great actor, but in no way, in terms of how he looked and also the way he acted, did he resemble Art Howe.
Right.
So that was really an unfortunate thing. They were looking for the conflict, which is such a big part of movie making, right? So they wanted that between Billy and the manager, but it was an unfair characterization. I've always felt badly about that. It wasn't right for Art. And I thought that they did do justice to the movie, to the book. After all, that was an economics of baseball book. Yeah. And the movie did justice to what Michael Lewis was trying to get across in the book. Obviously, in terms of the success of the team that year, they barely touched on Hudson, Mulder, and Zito. So, but the scenes were very well acted. It was a good movie. It was well done. They took a lot of time to get it right. I think the acting was really good. I enjoy watching it. But other than the characterization of Art, I thought they did a really good job.
I would think that of the many things that they did, you probably experienced this in your book. I've got 5,000 pages that I could write about Bill King, but I've got to narrow it down to 290 or however many pages you have. There are probably numerous incidences within that streak itself that they could have put in, but didn't have time, including the scene that you were a part of.
My part probably sucked. So there was no reason to put my part in there. I was not born to act in a movie. I was born to do radio. I don't think acting was my cup of tea.
Well, I'm glad they put the thing, the Hatteberg home run. They've got the conversation in the bowels of the stadium between Billy and Dave Justice. That scene, I thought, different things that help set the tone for the casual fan to be in, but yet my athletic background, all of yours, Steven, you especially, okay, it has to be real enough, it has to be believable enough for me to want to watch more. And I think they touched on that.
And I think if you look at Bill and you know, the punctuation in his career was his call of Hatterberg's home run. And I thought, you know, he came back from vacation. Fortunately, the A's won the 19th game, so Bill came back from vacation. He was on the air in the 9th inning and got to call Hatterberg's home run, which was a phenomenal call. It was like the climax of the movie in a way. It was the single greatest moment in the movie that people remember. Bill nailed it, and I think it really helped Bill get in the Hall of Fame.
Yeah,
and for good reason, because Bill deserved to be. The only unfortunate thing about Bill getting the Frick Award was that it was an award that was handed out posthumously, but it's certainly deserving. So it was so great. It was fitting that Bill was able to come back and call the 20th game.
Now, as a lifelong fan and historian of the team and even a player, I can tell you that movie captured the essence of, literally, as Grady Fuson said it in the movie, the actor who played him, Oakland A's baseball. We could teach them Oakland Athletics baseball. And there is and I know from being in spring training and playing for Fuson and Lippman and Dick Wincheck, that there is such a thing as Oakland A's baseball. And it was captured in that movie very nicely. Now, of course, what Billy did in this movie was change it and give it some more horsepower in terms of, okay, we're going to get a lot of walks and we're going to work on. But the A's always did that. The great Oakland clubs, Reggie Jackson got a lot of walks. Those guys were grinders. Sal Bando would grind pitchers, and they always did it very similarly to the way the A's did it during your era, Ken. But it was watching that movie, and of course I saw it originally at the premiere as you did, Ken, was absolutely incredible to me, and it hit so home to me because there were so many either actors in the movie who I knew personally or characters in the movie personally, whether it was Grady Fuson or it was Mike Gillespie, the head baseball coach at USC, who played help me, Ken, the manager after Art.
Ken Maka.
Ken Maka. He played a role. He told me the same thing that you just were talking about. He had some speaking roles, and eventually he ended up on the cutting room floor. But that's Hollywood. That's the way it goes. And then I don't know if you saw at that premiere, Ken, but Grady Fuson was at that premiere.
Yeah, and Grady's.
That was the first time I had seen him.
Yeah, really, really good friend. He and you mentioned Keith Lippman. They've been so instrumental in the A's success over the years.
No question. And, I remember talking to Grady, and, he apologized. I'm sorry we released you back. And I said, my friend, I gave everything I had to the game. I had nothing left. I'd left it all on the field. And I got in. I'd just been accepted to go to USC. I was ready to move on with the rest of my life. But what an era it was. And, you're the voice of that. I mean, you're the voice of the A's after Bill King. So what is the responsibility of Ken Korach of being the voice of this great franchise, the Oakland A's, in the years after the great Bill has passed this mortal coil?
Well, I think it would be the same as it would be for any broadcaster, Steve, and that is it starts with when you're on the air painting the picture. So when I asked Vince Scully about the essence of a baseball broadcast many years ago, he said that you're believable and that you're responsible. And so to be the eyes and ears of the audience, I think, is the most important thing, and to try to engage the audience. And as we said earlier, give the audience a reason to care. And I've been asked this a lot, especially with the proliferation of analytics. At its core, what I do is the same that I've done for years or decades now. And you do have responsibilities off the field. the A's were just in Vegas, and I had a press conference I had to host, or I was asked to host on the Friday night. They had a reception after the game on Saturday. And so there are certain things off the field that are part of the responsibility of doing what I do, media things. So, but I just feel like I want to adhere to the tenets of my profession and put in an honest day's work and represent the team. In many ways, you work for the fans too. I don't think any broadcaster should forget that you're someone who needs to deliver for the fans. And especially Chet Kern used to talk about this a lot at the end of his broadcast, that he would dedicate the broadcast to the shut-ins. So I think a lot about people that can't get to the ballpark. Mm-hmm. And this is their conduit. This is their way to have their link to baseball. Maybe we'll never have a chance to see a game in person, but if I can provide some entertainment for them and maybe a diversion, those are the people that I really think about when I'm doing a game.
Well, you're describing my dad, the end of his life. He passed away in 2011. In fact, just weeks before the Moneyball premiere. Mm-hmm. And, end of his life, he was 93 when he passed. I mean, he was listening to you. He was listening to you. And I remember going to the baseball coach at the University of California and thanking him for taking his team to the College World Series that year and giving an old Cal baseball fan happiness. And you gave my dad happiness, all of you guys, Bill King, Lon Simmons, Monty Moore, so many people. And my dad, at the end of his life, but throughout his life, the radio was ubiquitous.
Yeah.
Thanks
for saying that. It means a lot. I'm fully willing to admit that part of my job is to try to sell tickets. I'm an A's employee. But I also feel that you can't sell a ticket unless you're believable. So that if you always say everything is great for your team, then nobody's going to really care when something great happens, because they're going to say, well, he always says that. So I think one of the best ways to sell tickets is to be believable, so that when something great happens, it resonates with your listening audience. And the A's, one of the many things I can say about the A's and my relationship, and it goes back for 30 seasons now, is that they've trusted me to tell their story. And there's never been a time when they've said, you shouldn't have said that, or why did you say that, or maybe in the fifth inning, Ken, you should say this. I've never had anyone looking over my shoulder trying to influence me in terms of the perspective or the context or whatever color I'm trying to bring into the broadcast. So when you have the freedom to do, like if I do a lousy broadcast, I'm accountable for that. It's on me, because I don't have anybody looking over my shoulder telling me what to do. It's really hard to do your job, no matter what job you have, when you're constantly worrying about what everybody's thinking about you, especially the people that employ you. That's never happened with the A's. So I feel like I've had the freedom to do the games the way I think they should be done, for better or for worse. And this is a very subjective business, so people can pass whatever judgment they want on what I do. But what I do is, to me, authentic, because I'm not under the kind of pressure to conform to some guideline that has been set up for me.
You're absolutely right, and I can confirm. But I want to bring up something that I'm not even sure that you've really realized. You probably do, but okay. You're a fan. You're at the game. You've watched the game. You've been in the stands. You've watched the game. You then proceed to your car. You get in your car and you're driving down the 880, and you're turn on the radio. And now you're listening to the post-game show. And this is also a very important part of the radio man's, the broadcaster's job, because I've just seen the game. Now you're describing what I've seen. And sometimes now I've often scored the game, so I've tried to really But now I'm getting a recap. Okay, that's the guy who got the hit. That's how it went down in the 8th inning and some of the decision making. Talk a little bit about the post-game show, the interview, and then the review of the.
I don't do a whole lot of the post-game stuff anymore, Steve, but thank you for mentioning that. When the game ends, we pretty much throw it to Chris Townsend, who does our post-game. We do a little back and forth, at least we have the last several years. We will kind of dissect the game and try to add a little context or texture to the game. This coming year, Steve is going to actually simulcast the radio and TV post-game shows for the A's. They're going to start a half hour before the game starts on radio and TV on NBC Sports California, and they'll also simulcast the post-game show on radio. But yeah, we used to have a good time with that. Well, Bill used to take a great deal of ribbing because remember when Bill would do the highlights and they would cut up all the highlights and then he would play them back on the post-game show. Well, that would take like a half hour because you couldn't get, it was very hard to get Bill to stop talking. And the bus would be warming up. We'd have to get to the airport to get on a plane to get somewhere. And Bill would still be replaying the 2-2 pitch in the 3rd inning. Like, come on, Bill, let's go. We got to get out of here. So, but he really loved doing that, the highlight segment on the show.
Do you mind me asking, Ken, real quick, if you don't mind? There's a difference that I think you need to be well aware of. You mentioned how nobody looks over your shoulder and you're allowed some freedoms to speak. There's a difference between being a reporter and being a commentator.
Mm-hmm.
You've got to kind of mesh between the two of them. I'm going to tell you what's going on here, but it's really not my opinion versus, only giving stats and not giving your pay. That move didn't work. Sometimes that doesn't go over very well because people get offended and their feelings get hurt. You've got to cross into that area a lot of times, don't you?
Yeah, and I like to leave a lot of the second guessing to the post-game show because it really isn't my job. I'll never say that was a stupid move. How could you have done that? But I'll also provide, I think, options so that fans can make their own decision. The A's could have certainly sacrificed there. I'm not sure what, maybe we'll find out after the game what Mark Conce was thinking bringing in the left-hander in the 7th inning.
Right.
But through experience and through time talking to the manager, I've always felt, and this goes back with Art Howe and the rest of the managers after Art was our skipper in 96 and through 2002, they usually have a very good reason for what they did. So who am I to second guess what they did? I might provide the options perhaps, or what he might have been thinking or not thinking in those situations. But I'm not going to second guess because, and the other thing is sometimes there are things we don't know about. Maybe on a show they're going to rail about why so-and-so wasn't in the game. Well, maybe he wasn't available.
Yeah.
So I don't want to jump the gun. That's one reason you're down on the field before the game, or you may ask those questions after the game. But you're right. I mean, my job is a little bit more of like the beat writer, and the post-game show is a little bit more the job of the columnist. But
I love this team. They're everything to me. You're emotionally involved. Do me a favor and tell me how many times you've hit the wall and broken some drywall in the studio when you go to a commercial break because the team fell apart and they take a 4-3 lead and they turn it into an 8-6.
Yeah, that's happened a few times. But I think the other thing is if you have some credibility and you're around a lot. Marty Brenneman always used to talk about this, that if he in his way would criticize a player, he said, I'll be in the clubhouse the next day. And if you have a problem with something I said, I'll be there. You can talk to me. Mm-hmm. I'm never going to be a hatchet man on the air, but there are ways you can do it in a way that provides a little more context, that instead of saying so-and-so is really having a terrible month, I'm not afraid to say that so-and-so is batting 180 this month. Right. So there are ways you can do it, but you just temper it a little bit. You're still saying the same thing, but I'm not trying to make a name for myself by taking gratuitous shots at a player either. But you can't hide from the fact there are people know what's going on. People know. I mean, if you've lost 9 games in a row and you've been playing poorly, you got to say it because everybody knows it. And, Bill, Bill was famous for letting it all hang out. I mean, Bill was unvarnished on the air, and it was one of his great traits. And when I interviewed Billy Beane for the book, and I asked Billy, I said, what were you thinking when Bill would really get on the team, when he could be kind of tough on the team? And Billy's answer was, he said, if Bill King was criticizing us, then I think we probably deserved it.
Yeah. Yeah. And there's a difference too between, and I'm not criticizing anybody by saying this, but there's an average fan that's out there that go, that guy's a bum. How many baseball players have you heard, because they don't know what else to call him, they call him a bum? But he's on the turf right now. He's wearing spikes. He's playing, and you're not. So they're great. I can't do it. So I understand that there's a value there to the separation between, really elite ball players kind of struggling back and forth. And by the way, our opponents, they watch film. They're highly paid. They go to practices. They want to win too, versus my team. And those guys don't even deserve to be here. There's a separation that you obviously are a part of as well. These guys are the best in the world at what they're doing. Leave them alone.
Yeah, they are. There's no question about that. And, it's not for lack of effort, right? If somebody's out there busting their butt, it's pretty hard to be too critical, right? So, one of the things is that it's a lot easier to do the games when everything is great, right? When everybody's happy and the team is winning, and then you just do the game. Like, for instance, the last couple of years, we were confronted with having to make decisions on some of the stuff that was going on in the ballpark, for instance, and the emotion that you had in the park. And so life doesn't go along on a straight line, neither does a career in broadcasting or any other career. So at times when you have to deviate from just calling the game, and you have to have maybe a little more perspective than that.
Yeah. Talk a little bit about, if you don't mind, Steven, if there's more for you to get in this, but just the state of the game right now. Let's just say the AL West, with Houston, you got Texas, you got the Angels, Seattle yourselves. What do you see in the coming future? You obviously are moving. Is there a safety amongst the rest of the teams? Okay, only are the A's going to be moving. There might be. You mentioned earlier that Sacramento might have a team here in the possible near future. What is your understanding of the state of the game right now?
Well, you have two teams playing in minor league ballparks. You have the A's and the Rays, and I think the Sacramento, the A's will be there for 3 years, and I don't know how the ballpark's going to play and how that will play into things. They say that it'll be kind of neutral early in the year, and then because of the heat and the way the ball carries, it might be more of a hitter's park later in the season. But we're going to find out pretty soon, because the A's home opener is on the 31st of March against the Cubs. Yeah. We're moving into our condo up there on the 23rd of March. So it's going to be interesting. We're in a sense kind of going into the great unknown, but there's also going to be a lot of energy at the ballpark there too. So how that will affect things, I don't know. Not sure. I'm not much of a prognosticator. I do think the A's have a better club. I'm impressed by what they've done with the player development on that side of things. And I've really enjoyed the spring, being down here. I enjoy the players. And of course, spring training is the great illusion. You don't learn a whole lot. It's really a fantasy land. The weather is great. Nobody's lost a game that means anything. And you can't go overboard. They say never fall in love in March. And so the baseball landscape is littered with players who batted 500 during the spring, and then they begin the season 1 for 20. But I'm excited for the season. I can't wait for it to get started. It looks like maybe the Astros won't quite be as good, because I'm not sure their pitching will be as strong, and they've lost Bregman. I think the Rangers likely will be better. The Angels are kind of the great unknown. They've added a lot of players this year. The Mariners have a phenomenal starting rotation, although George Kirby will start the year on the IL. They didn't do much to address their hitting. So I think the A's have a chance to be in there and if you can just hang around 500 at the All-Star break and maybe you make a move or two, I wouldn't put it past the A's to have a shot to at least be sniffing a wild card this year. I think a lot will have to break right for that to happen. But I think the A's, they're on an upward trajectory, and we'll see what happens when the season begins.
You mentioned the ticket sales that you're helping to assist with by promoting and marketing the club and making them exciting while you're on the air. What are the actual numbers? Are you seeing good returns right now? I'd love, even if it's a small stadium, if it's packed and people are having a great time, it doesn't matter how big the stadium is. It really wouldn't make a difference. Yeah, it'd be great if you had 40,000, but with the seating capacity there, are early indications that you're going to sell the place out?
I think so.
Good.
There's only, counting the lawn seating, people can sit out on the lawn in the outfield, beyond the outfield fences. It's about 13,500 and a little over 10,000 seats in the stands. They stopped selling season tickets several weeks ago because they had sold out of the season tickets that they were going to allot. When they put single game tickets on sale for the home opener and also the July 4th series with the Giants, they got 75,000 requests.
Wow. And
this past Friday, they actually started taking, now this is parenthetical because it involves Las Vegas, but they put people can buy, can make deposits for the right to purchase season tickets at the ballpark in Vegas when it opens in 28. And I think they hit where they thought they were going to hit after like 2 hours. So there's still a lot of interest in the club. And my hope is that we'll still have people that listen to the games who are A's fans in the Bay Area, and that we'll still be on a radio station in San Francisco. We have a great flagship station in Sacramento, but I understand this has been very difficult for A's fans, and it's been emotional. But I've also heard from A's fans who say, I want to still listen to the games, and that you guys will still provide a link to the ball club. And when I'm doing the games, it's still the green and gold, it's still the A's, and hopefully we can still provide some of the texture that you were talking about earlier, because the franchise has such a rich history.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, go ahead, Steven.
Well, I can tell you that it's going to be a very interesting year in Sacramento, a very interesting period. Sacramento is a river city, and Sacramento, I've always felt this way, is more like a Midwestern city. It is not like a coastal California city. It sits on a river like the Mississippi River, and there's the fans and just the way they look and the way they talk, they seem more like a Midwestern town. And Midwestern towns tend to be big baseball towns like Chicago and St. Louis. And I think you're going to get a very enthusiastic reception. There were already A's fans. It's already the A's market. Sacramento was not that far from Oakland. It's really just the Carquinez Straits and the deltas of the Sacramento Delta that separate the two cities. It's always been in the same market. You've always had a radio presence there, a TV presence there, a newspaper presence there. And I'm wishing you great luck. And so I think this is going to be, frankly, and another thing, I really think the history of the team is you have a few down years, and the team has always relied on young talent that comes up. They've always had a great farm system since I was playing there, since before that. And I think you're going to see in the Sacramento years some contenders, and that's going to create some interesting dynamics, because those fans are going to become attached to this team, and they're not going to want them to leave. I'm just telling you right now, they're going to become attached to you and this team, Ken.
Glad to hear that, and I agree. And we spent about 3 or 4 days there at the end of January, early February. Actually did an event with that was basically sponsored by the Kings people, because the owner of the Kings would really like to get a baseball expansion team someday. So you're right talking about the desire to get a team. And the other thing is that the ballpark is so adjacent to downtown. You can walk right across the bridge over the river and you're in downtown Sacramento. And Sacramento's had a real revitalization in terms of the downtown area. There are a lot of good restaurants down there and stuff. And, we're very well aware of the history. Some of the great managers in baseball come from Sacramento.
That's right.
There's a rich history. It's the cradle of managers, if you really think about some of those folks who grew up there, played high school ball, college ball there, and went on to manage in the big leagues. So I'm looking forward to it for sure. I can't wait to get started.
It's going to be hot.
It's going to be hot in the summertime for sure. There's absolutely no question.
Just mentioning my dad, long trips to Lake Tahoe. We went there all the time. And back in the day, we did not have air conditioning. And in fact, this is, I think, before the 80 freeway was built. And I think you'd have to take the 50. And my dad always said the same thing. Well, you can't go through Sacramento in the heat. You just cannot go there through. I mean, that was my.
Well, yeah. I mean, it's
said, avoid the heat.
We're living up off the 50. Yeah, there's nothing you can do about it, though, my friend. There's going to be heat. It's baseball season, so. Well, I already told my broadcast partner, Johnny Dosco, that you're going to see me in shorts for about 3 months out there. It may not be a real pleasing sight to see, but I'm going to be in shorts out there.
Well, Tony La Russa used to say one of the A's advantages was the colder weather. He said we make a trip in August to, hotter weather places, Houston and what have you. And they'd come back and be refreshing breezes. So you're not going to get as many refreshing breezes.
But the marine layer will not be a factor.
No.
Right. No, won't be. But hey, Tony's been down here, by the way. It's been fun spending some time with Tony. So it's been great. He's down here. He still has a role as a consultant with the White Sox, advisory role. So it's always good to see him.
He is such a significant part of baseball history, not just the hair, but the obviously with the Bash brothers and everything that was a part of that, his obvious career with the Cardinals and everything else. Talk a little bit about his influence on you in terms of just making it easier for you to do games. And do you have a good relationship with him, at least?
Very good.
Yeah.
Now, when I started, it was the year he left. He went to the Cardinals in '96, and that's when Art Howe took over. That was my first year, so I didn't really know him that well. And had not spent much time around him at the ballpark, but he always kept a home in the East Bay. And then there was a time when he was out of baseball and he was working for the commissioner's office. And I'll kind of leave you guys with this, and it sounds like a piece of self-aggrandizement or kind of an ego thing, but we all need a boost at times during our lives and our careers. And one time when Tony was out of the game and he was working for Major League Baseball, don't remember the exact year, but the A's were playing a postseason game, and Tony was sitting in the booth next to us with Frank Robinson. And that booth was open. It's the visiting TV booth normally. And Tony popped into the booth and he said, "Hey, I want to tell you something." And we were walking down the hallway of the press box at the Coliseum. And Tony said, "I need to tell you that I've been listening to a lot of the games and that you call a baseball game exactly the way I think it should be called." Now, when Tony La Russa says something like that to you, because he doesn't give out compliments just like it's an everyday thing. And I've never forgotten that, and it meant the world to me. And to have someone like that who's a sage, really, with his wisdom and his devotion and love of the game, it really gave me a huge boost.
Absolutely. Wow, that's a nice compliment. Now, did Frank didn't have as many compliments, I don't think. So you didn't get one from Frank, but you did get one of the. Did he call you did he give you his cloak of immortality?
That has not happened. Nor do I think it will. But
okay.
The day that Bill King got the Frick Award posthumously, they had a reception after the event at the Hall of Fame, literally in the Hall of Fame, where they have all the plaques. And Joe Morgan was, because Joe grew up in the East Bay and was a big Bill fan, he wanted to be the one to present the plaque to Bill's daughter, Kathleen. And I'd known Joe a little bit, interviewed him a couple times, spent a little bit of time with him. And at the reception, I told my wife, I really want to find Joe and thank him for that gesture to honor Bill the way he did. And because I knew it had meant a lot to him and meant a lot to us. And I went to the table, they were little round tables. And Joe Morgan was sitting with Frank Robinson and Henry Aaron.
Oh,
How about what do you say?
right.
I couldn't get the words out. It's like, it's royalty, right? When these three guys are sitting together. So it makes it, it's been a privilege to be part of this game all these years, and just to run into those people and to be speechless.
Well, to be a fly on the wall, and would that be an appropriate title for a book? Would you know anything about that?
I might know a little bit about it. Yeah.
Tell everyone who's a little bit about that title, because being a fly on the wall of that conversation with.
Well, Susan Schlesinger and I wrote a book about the A's. Yeah. So that's, and she was great. I mean, she did so much work on that book, and Triumph Books published it. So, yeah, thanks, Harper, for mentioning that.
Oh, you're very welcome. You have two. Are you working on another? Is there a third book in?
I don't think I got a third book in me. I'll leave that to Steve.
He's only got about 35, I think.
Right. Book writing is hard. It's hard.
It is, but it's you love it and you have a passion for it. It's not that hard. If it's something you're just born to do and you just love it and you're just wake up every day.
Yeah.
Today I get to write or research. Yeah. And I know you feel that same way about, your chosen profession of broadcasting. There's some similarity between what I do as a sports writer and what you do as a sportscaster.
You're communicating, right?
Communicating. But you have to have look, if you don't have a love and a passion for doing it. And we talked about jobs that we had as kids. And I didn't have a love for digging ditches. I did not have a love for the law. I was involved in the law and politics and things like that. I didn't come to writing till I was 35.
Right.
We talked about, it wasn't like Vince Scully, who was 20 years old when Red Barber picks him out of, let's do a Boston College football game in 1950. You had to struggle and fight your way in, just like I did. And Harper played 11 years in the National Football League. We talked about what does it take to do that, and you have to just have a desire, and that's what you do. And that's what I love about you and what I appreciate about you.
Well, I really enjoyed it. Harper, it was great, and Steve, it was a lot of fun being part of your show. I apologize, my voice is not in great shape at this point, but we got through it, right?
Frank Sinatra has a cold, is a great writer once named him.
Yeah,
about him.
Well, you said that writing is hard. I think hitting a curveball is hard, and maybe Steven would say that striking out McGuire would be hard. Those are difficult things and certainly tasks. I know that in your Wikipedia page, your knee, you had a replacement and everything like that, but then you re-injured. How's your health?
My health's great. Thank you for asking. I had knee replacement in 2012. It changed my life because I literally couldn't walk when I tried to walk into the operating room. So it's been phenomenal. And I had a little setback because I tore, it wasn't the replacement, but I tore the LCL on the outside of my knee, of the knee that I had replaced. So I missed some time in 2015, but I'm still trying to shoot my age, so.
Left knee, not just, there's plenty of pressure on that when
left knee
you're teeing off.
I've kind of invented a swing.
Okay. What was the difference? And I'm not trying to get into the medical field here, but very quickly, there were some indicators that you were probably hey, this is not right. And then was there a fear or a trepidation about actually having the surgery itself? And then very briefly, when you get out of surgery, there's a certain pain, but the stuff that got you there in the first place, it's gone. It disappears because the new knee takes care of that. Describe that in your words, what that was like for you.
It was during spring training of 2012. It was in March of 12. And I had torn my ACL playing basketball in 1984. Had arthroscopic surgery, but it didn't really help any. So I had a full ACL tear. I was bone on bone. I was totally arthritic in my left knee.
Okay.
I had no trepidation having the surgery because I needed it. I mean, I'm not, people use the word literally kind of loosely. I literally couldn't walk. So I had no choice.
Okay.
I had no trepidation whatsoever about having the surgery. Now, the recovery was brutal. The first 6 weeks were brutal. The pain was really intense, but it was worth it. I don't have any pain at all now. And it's been 13 years.
That's amazing.
It's been phenomenal. I couldn't play any golf, and golf's a huge part of my life. So
yeah,
it's a big thing for me. Been great.
Well, getting down in a catcher's position to visit with kids or grandkids or family members, you know what I'm saying? Pet the dog. When you can't do stuff like that. And I would imagine that that's a part of the pain that it's hard to tie my shoes, right? There's simple things in life that become very, very difficult. Because
how about you? Do you have all that stuff yourself?
I've got every part that I was given, including my appendix. So I'm very fortunate. But I'll notice, there are things that don't work the same way. I'll tell you what. I've moved around. My shoulder is I'm struggling with that. But
You absorbed a few hits in your day.
A couple, yeah. But like I was going to say, other than that, Mrs. Lincoln, how was the play, right?
My cousin played in the NFL for 6 or 7 years.
Really?
Yeah. Wide receiver, Greg Camarillo. Not the punter, Rich Camarillo.
No.
But receiver, Greg Camarillo.
Yes.
Yeah. My first cousin's son.
How about that? I love it.
Yeah.
Good bloodline, I would guess, right?
I hope so.
Did they get your genes?
I doubt it, because I would never have lasted that long.
Okay.
No way.
Well, I couldn't hit a golf ball straight. You're doing that. Steven, how about you? Are you a good golfer?
I would be. I've got skills to be a good golfer if I had passion for it and played it a lot. But you have to play it all the time and practice, and I have not done that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well,
you have to stay at it. That's for sure.
You sound like the guy who goes, I could have been a major leaguer if I,
You asked me. I mean, I have a nice.
I've got all the skills. That's pretty. You
have to practice it. Look, I'm 6'6", so I've got a nice long swing and follow through. There's no question. The weird thing about when I hit a golf course, my first swing, the ball goes straight down the course, and then after that, now it's in my head, and I'm shanking it the rest of the day. So.
Okay.
You don't want your head to be involved in golf.
No.
Heads like broadcasting. Get your head out of it. Just let it flow, right? Just do the game.
He's got a starter's mentality, and he should have a relief pitcher's mentality, right? Just one.
But he's also was a lefty.
Yeah, that's true. Do you hit left-handed, Steven?
No, I'm a righty.
Oh, yeah, okay.
I'm a right-handed pitcher and hitter.
Okay. I thought his mind kind of worked like a lefty.
Well, you're right. I'm good friends with Bill Spaceman Lee, and so he probably he turns me around a lot. So
Kurt Young was a lefty.
He was a lefty,
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, Ken, we want to say thank you. We want to be respectful of your time. You've given us plenty of yours. We appreciate it so much. An amazing career, so many wonderful stories, and how you got started to where you are now. We just can't tell you enough about how much. We love the fact that you were able to give all of that information to us, and I'm sure our viewers are greatly passionate about the relief that you bring and just an ease of telling your story and how you got to where you did. What a tremendous day that you gave us.
Thank you, Harper. Thank you, Steve. I enjoyed it. Appreciate it, guys.
You're very welcome.
So much, my friend. Thank you.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, a very unique experience here today, and if you're a swinging A's fan like Steven is, and you're wearing the gear and the green and the gold and the gold and the green, we love it. And if you're not, hopefully you will be a little bit more here after listening to our interview here with Ken Carrock. We greatly appreciate it. And this has been a great episode. Thank you, Logan Landers, for being our producer and engineer and getting all those pictures together for us. So for Ken Korak, for Steven Travers, I'm Harper LaBelle saying thank you for tuning in to 100 Yards of Football. This has been our Steven Travers Show, Take 5 with Steven. So we thank you so much for being a part of it. Have a great day, everybody.